everybody, and welcome to There's a Will. In this sterling edition, this new bright-eyed edition, I have a collection of savants, soothsayers, prognosticators, and men about not only town, but countries and the world. We have a cross-section of people for you. Let me introduce them. In the studio, next to me, I have the inimitable Nick Richardson, as usual. He is here. You'll recognize him from many other appearances, and some of them we can even talk about. Next to him is Guy Pinsent, also equally resplendent. I might mention that Guy did go to Cambridge, so his words will carry more weight than all the rest of our words, except Nick's, because Nick went to Oxford. And you know, later we're going to put some gloves on him, and let's find out which of those universities is actually more august. And join us on Skype, and this is fun. I'm pretty excited about this because we haven't done Skype before, and I only recently learned what Skype is. It's amazing. What a world of technology we live in today. At any rate, we have Harold von Kursk, correspondent, filmmaker, interviewer of more famous people that you read about all the time than you could shake a stick at. I know, because I had a stick one time, tried to shake it at them, and it did not work. There was not enough time. And the equally ebullient, resplendent, and other words, oh, they look pretty on the screen, I can see you boys, is joining us from beautiful downtown Warsaw, Ivo Bender, who is the producer, the esteemed producer of the Catholic Network. What's the name of it, Ivo, the Catholic Network?
EWTN.
EWTN, Catholic Network, throughout Central Europe, and including, isn't it, Sweden as well? So there you go. Put the Vikings in there too. And speaking of, what?
And the Netherlands.
And the Netherlands. Didn't know that. New edition. Congratulations on that. Based in Alabama, is it not?
It is, right outside of Birmingham.
Right outside Birmingham, Alabama. So the reason I say that is because not only you're a man of Catholic television, but you're a man of Catholic taste with a small c, who is not only familiar with this here part of the world, but a man who knows America like the back of his hand. So, as does Harold. Harold's from Canada. Harold, you're from Montreal, aren't you?
Born in Berlin, raised in Montreal.
That's right. Born in Berlin, so he's one of them. And but that's okay. We welcome you. And I'm a good Canadian brother of ours to the Americans, right next door, and an old friend of mine. Harold, we've known each other 25 years, I guess, yeah?
Yes,
I remember we were wearing short pants when we met, and our moms were just taking us out of school. Yeah.
You're mistaking me for someone else.
That wasn't you?
Sartorial tastes.
No, you wouldn't wear shorts? Okay. Not at school, anyway. Yeah.
Not because my legs aren't good. I just don't like shorts.
Okay, you said a word, I'm not sure of the meaning of it. You said sartorial. I'm going to flip that over to Nick for a definition. Sartorial?
Sartorial? Elegant dressing.
Okay, elegant dressing. From time to time during the broadcast, I may have to refer to Nick for words that Harold will introduce into conversation, because I will not have time to look them up in the dictionary, no matter how much, or even on the phone dictionary. Gentlemen, we're going to talk about today's issues. There's so many of them, it's hard to know where to start. This is the biggest, this is a cornucopia of personages in the studio and without the studio, compared to what's been going on in this particular show since the quarantine, which was 3 months ago, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But so much has happened. We've had the impeachment of the American president, and then right after at the same time, the rising virus in China, and then right after that, of course, in mid-March, the COVID shutdown virtually throughout the world. Something that in Poland we're just coming out of today. It's just ending today. The borders are opening, and in that sense it's ending. International flights still somewhat restricted. Financial chaos that has not been seen in terms of unemployment and business bankruptcies and shutting down since the 1930s, not even 2008, worse than that. But, you know, as the REM says, it's the end of the world, but I feel fine. It's a nice day. I mean, what are you going to do?
The sun is shining.
Yeah, the sun is shining for a change. And then, of course, the late unpleasantness, the riots, in fact, protests accompanied by riots, which is always fun. Let's go right to this. Gentlemen, are you aware that in America we now have, while the Confederacy is being hated and the battle flag of the Confederacy is being banned throughout, and perhaps as it should be, but that's a topic for discussion. And Gone with the Wind being taken off television at this very time that secession is out of fashion, popularly, certainly on the left. It has been, part of Seattle has seceded, not only from Washington State, but from the United States. What say you, Nicky Rich?
Well, because I'm not American, obviously, but I mean, I think this is a load of nonsense. I mean, what we live in an era now where people are, grievances and division are being encouraged by certain politicians for short-term political gain. And people are getting excited about things which are completely irrelevant. Now, let's take the case in point. It's disgraceful that it is a continual feature of American policing that certain sectors of the community are subject to, or appear to be subject to, these terrible, you know, mispolicing. I mean, the case of George Floyd. The man was on the ground in handcuffs with 4 police officers posing no threat to anybody, and still the chap thought he had to put his knee on his neck and kill him. And that is clearly a wrong which has to be dealt with. And somebody, presumably at the federal level, has to go to the 18,000 American police forces, or the police force in the United States, and ensure proper training, proper disciplining of officers who don't behave properly, and proper
discipline.
Yeah, well,
they're up for murder.
Well,
not just the one who did it, but the other 3.
Well,
quite right.
But they need to be. There's obviously this is a continuing problem, and something needs to be something needs to change. But
yes, you're right.
the idea that you sort of solve this particular problem and you solve the feeling that you know, using the Black Lives Matter nomenclature, that blacks feel that they're discriminated against, does not actually then give an excuse for sort of mass vandalism. And then the fact you now have people in London having to board up the statues of Sir Winston Churchill, having to board up the Cenotaph, which is a memorial to those who fought in the 2 world wars, because these protests degenerate into an orgy of violence and destruction. I mean, there's something clearly wrong.
There's a huge amount of ignorance, I think.
This is the point.
There's a really superficial, hey, I discovered the world yesterday attitude.
Exactly.
And boy, it's complete, you know, nihilistic solipsism.
Exactly.
It's all about me. I'm a baby kicking and screaming, and everything that I recognize, it's the first time anybody's ever seen it.
Just to take one example, which, I mean, sorry, I don't dominate the proceedings, but to take the Mayor of London, Mr. Khan, was on the television, has been on television several times, sort of saying, oh, well, you know, you live in a large city of 8 million people, it's inevitable that teenagers will be stabbed, there's not much we can do about it. This is the same man who actually seems not to care about the lives of our teenagers and what is the cause of them being stabbed, but at the same time is getting very excited about street names and statues reflecting the history of the nation, a history which predates his birth, predates his family's arriving in the United Kingdom. And why get excited about that? Why get excited about history and not be excited about today's issues, which are people dying on the streets of London?
Harold, what's the perspective in Estonia? Thank you, Nick. What's the perspective from Estonia on this?
Well, Estonians
not just Estonia, but your perspective being you're in Estonia.
But I agree with the previous speaker to the extent that there has been, I think, an awakening of consciousness in general around the world with regard to racial tensions, racial issues. And I think I would like to take a virtual knee in deference to the sadistic murder of George Floyd by a quasi-psychotic policeman who apparently had been nursing a grudge against Mr. Floyd from an incident at a nightclub where they were both working as security personnel. So it's strange that even though
Had not heard that. Good point. Had not heard that. Yeah.
this incident has provoked a wave of anti-racist demonstrations, perhaps one of the trigger causes was the fact that this Mr. unfortunately named Chauvin was nursing a personal grudge against Mr. Floyd as much as a racially inspired one. But I think what we have to recognize that the George Floyd
I don't think
era,
that justifies widespread violence and rioting there. Yeah.
it's a change in paradigm.
At all. I don't think it justifies the rioting and destruction of people's property and lives. I have to say, I'm going to jump in with that. We have to be, clear about that.
Separate the essence from the excrescence of any movement. And the essence of the movement is a rejection of racism and of police brutality. And the excrescence are unfortunate demonstrations which result in violence and needless destruction of property.
Ivo?
Yep.
Would you care to add anything, carrying on? I want to get to the idea of Seattle as well, but do you want to, we can talk about Mr. Abbott and continue there if you have something you want to add. I have something I want to add there. Yeah. But I'd rather hear you.
Let's put things into perspective. Rioting in America is something that occurs fairly regularly. Even if we look back into the time of the Civil War, there were riots sparked by conscription in New York, which were actually partially aimed at the black community in New York City. There were racial riots in Chicago after the First World War. There were absolutely terrible riots in the 60s. And of course, let's not forget the rioting in LA in '92. So in a sense, this is a recurring phenomenon. So again, let's not lose the perspective that this what we're witnessing right now is something completely new. So that's just sort of putting things into a bit of more of a historical perspective. Not talking about the cultures, etc., etc. Just
I wanted to say thank you, Ivo. I wanted to say one thing. The Herald brought up a very interesting point that there may have been a grudge between George Abbott and the policeman who killed him, and that is really, to me, very William Faulkner. That sounds like something out of Mississippi, out of one of his books. But the other thing to remember in this case is there were only 12, I say only, but out of, how many people live in the United States, only 12 people, unarmed black people, were killed last year by police. There were, I believe, twice that, or around that, of white people. Not an excuse, just these are facts. Yes, I know the black population is less. It's only, it's 12, 13% of the United States population. But nonetheless, a much higher proportion of crime is committed relative to its population amongst the black population. Okay, now, that having been said, there was a white guy, Tim, his name escapes me right now, and that's a shame. I didn't write it down. In Dallas last summer, I believe it was, who was killed in virtually the same way. He was suffocated to death with a knee in his back after begging, please leave me alone. It's all on police cameras. And with him ending up saying, you are killing me, I'm dying. A white guy. The police were not even charged. This is in Dallas, which is famous for a rather militaristic police, rather unfair police. And nobody said anything about this. And the reason I saw it on, it was a CNN covered it, but it was brought up on the Jesse Lee Peterson show. No one else has brought this up. It took a black guy, the Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson, to bring it up on his show in Los Angeles, for that to even be mentioned. And I think it adds a lot of context. Evil is evil, and good is good. Then that should not change by color.
I think relativizing the argument.
Sorry?
I think it's a false equivalence, and I think you're relativizing.
Well, show me how. I'm not relativizing anything. I don't believe in that, in relativizing things. But I believe it's value for value. But tell me why where I'm wrong there, Harold.
Because the attacks by police on blacks are well documented. It's a pattern of harassment that has been brought by the police onto blacks and even Hispanics in the United States for a number of years. I mean, the racist culture in America dates back 350 years. And people think that with the enactment of the Civil Rights Amendment by Lyndon Johnson in 64 or 65, that racism was abolished. That's far from the truth. If one goes to Boston, in certain areas, blacks are subjected to taunts of the N-word repeatedly. It's even dangerous for blacks to go into certain areas of Boston. Not that it's not dangerous for whites to go into South Central LA. I'm just saying that there has been a climate of repression and racist aggression against black people in the United States. It's ingrained in the system.
I would agree with Harold.
What?
I'd agree with Harold.
Go ahead, Guy, jump in.
It's not fair to compare a white police officer killing a white person in the same circumstances. It's different, and racial tensions.
I'd like to know why it's different.
Because in that situation,
why some people are more special than others.
It's not racially motivated. It's wrong. Both cases are vile and wrong, but there's not the racial angle there, which needs to be stamped out. And I think, just stepping back from all the hysteria.
I don't understand that, though. I don't see why there's a racial angle in George Abbott and not the other guy.
The point is that people who join the police forces, most people are good people, but everyone's human, and there are always a few bad apples.
Absolutely.
And so, this Floyd thing, disgusting, brought it out, it's inflamed everything, but it was the racial angle, which is different from the example you gave last year.
I still don't understand why it's a racial. There's a guy and there's a guy. This guy's, now we know, as Harold has said, that, which makes it really interesting and even less racial, there was personal animosity. That's less racial. That's not more racial. If they knew each other and they had a beef from working together, that's personal.
Yeah.
Why is it racial?
I'm sure there's conflation of the two, though. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, maybe, but we can't be, we can't be inside the guy's mind.
So, I think the broader point...
What we can know is what he did wrong, and he's going down for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as he should.
But the broader point is that there are racial tensions, have been since time immemorial, which we have to stamp out. And we've made huge progress, but there's a long way to go. I think the other point is there's a huge difference between the situation in America and the situation in Britain. And the Black Lives Matter movement has been trying to now impose the same problems in Britain as there are in America, which is just wrong. Britain has come huge strides forwards. Is a very diverse and tolerant society compared to America.
Indeed, I would agree. I mean, you look at the present cabinet. Look at the height of British government. There are 5 members of the current cabinet. So that's of the 20 top ministers of the cabinet, 5 members are from ethnic minorities. Or, they're not, they wouldn't see that they're British, obviously. But the point is, since folk insist now, wrongly, what I find completely unacceptable and completely ironic is that we now have, in today's world, this sort of identity and racial gradation, which even the apartheid government in South Africa and even Adolf Hitler in their particularly perverted views of running countries didn't achieve. It's madness now that instead of saying we're all actually equal in the sight of God and all have to behave in a sensible fashion, we're now picking about, oh, well, you're this identity, you're that identity. And it's very interesting, on this whole point about, we now have these new words, BAME in England, with black, Asian, other minorities, whatever it stands for. If you look at the Chinese, for example, they, as a collection of folk, have never, ever been party or wanted to be associated with this sort of ethnic minority issue. They just get on with life. They suffer taunts, no doubt, like everybody else. But their solution to this problem is not to bleat about, oh, isn't the world terrible? It's they get on and they work hard and they just don't allow themselves to be labelled as anything different. And whereas there's too many politicians particularly are stirring up trouble Instead of saying, OK, we have to make sure the police are properly trained. We have to look at why are so many people feeling that they're alienated from society. What can we do? And we need to achieve that. But we will not achieve that if we stir up resentment by saying to people, oh, Winston Churchill was a racist, or this or that, or get completely thrown off track.
Is it prejudice, or is it, I mean, I'm willing to accept prejudice. Prejudice, I see. I don't know what racism is, and I don't really even believe in it. But I know that prejudice exists.
Well, prejudice does it. Racism is one of these modern labels which says, I don't want to discuss the issues with you because I don't like your views. So I'll accuse you of being a racist, therefore I don't have to deal with you.
But we know that prejudice exists.
Well,
prejudice exists for all kinds of reasons.
Exactly.
That's why we have law to make things fair.
Of course.
I think the concepts we should be looking at are fairness and unfairness.
Exactly.
Good and relative good and relative evil. Harold, there I used your word for you. Harold, jump in here with the... actually, Harold, please wait. I want to go to Ivo and say, Ivo, was there not prejudice against Poles over history? I find it a rich irony of this time that we sit in Poland, which is an oasis of calm, but a country which has suffered so much prejudice. Not to say racism, because I don't really know how do you apply that, but prejudice is enough. It's too much. Yeah.
Well, speaking of irony, my favorite example of anti-Polish prejudice and irony at the same time was a joke made during a speech by the founder of the famed news station CNN, Ted Turner, who was making a speech and joked about a Polish minesweep who was reaching with his foot and covering his ears because he was so stupid. So there are several ironies of it. Of course, CNN is the temple of the enlightened left, so completely devoid of any prejudice. But the real irony is that the actual minesweeping device, this thing that is used to discover mines and demine minefields, was actually invented by a Polish engineer. So yes, there is tons of prejudice, and of course, I have encountered that on many occasions.
Couldn't we use that word? Couldn't we just say prejudice exists? We know it exists because all of us have seen that in our own lives. It has to be that black people are the only people who've ever been oppressed in the history of the world. I find that ludicrous. I find it a farce. Also, if you look at, and we should have a black guest. I should get Jesse Lee Peterson. I will try. I'm sure he'd come on. But for example, if you look at African countries, and I suppose people can say, oh, they don't work because they're oppressed by Western nations. But if you look at the history of African nations and the slave trade, it wasn't people from Europe going into Africa for the most, well, not for the most part. It would have happened in some cases, going into Africa and taking people out of the hinterland, the jungles, savannas, you name it. They were being sold off by their own people, because guess what? If you're having a war in Kenya between two tribes, and you can capture one and get rid of them by sending them to another continent, hey, there's more for you there. And so there's a lot of tribal history in Africa. It's not a perfect place any more than any place is perfect, but at least in the United States was an experiment to try and achieve that fairness that didn't exist elsewhere. Exception. I'll include the United Kingdom as a case of part of that experiment, I mean, as guided, and I believe that's true. Having spent 10 years.
I may just jump in. The fact that the U.S. The political discourse and U.S. social theories tend to dominate the world conversation right now. I find it rather interesting because I do find. And that's my rare criticism of America. I do find the general outlook, the consensus, so to speak, there rather parochial, because it concentrates, obviously, on its own history without looking out and looking into other continents and the history of other countries. In a sense, this American exceptionalism translates even to this to the social analysis. So I would agree with you, William, that well, yes, slavery, which is a terrible stain on America's history, was abolished in these parts of Europe in the 1860s, but
Actually,
it involved
the same time as in the United States. Yeah.
a little later.
Hang on. I mean, first point is, as vile as it is, slavery has been the norm in most of history globally. This is not a European thing or an American thing. It's a global thing.
Yeah, and there's more slaves per capita now than there ever have been. As Jimmy Carter famously said.
Yeah.
You know, so it's only been in the last 150 years, which is a pinprick in time, where slavery has been abolished and stopped, and led by Britain, actually, in the 1830s.
It was Wilberforce, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Sorry, when we're talking about this. That,
and Burke.
Yes, exactly. The British essentially outlawed the slave trade as early as 1807. And then throughout the empire by 1833. And you will be familiar as an American with the discussions at the time of drafting the American Constitution. You know, this whole question of slavery, they deliberately didn't want to discuss it. In fact, it was not actually included in the Constitution. You know,
yeah, I mean, there was a fight from the beginning of the United States to how do we get rid of slavery, and it was not something that was just skated over. Hey, I've got slaves. Let's keep them.
This is all very, very bad, of course. What I think is even worse is today in the world there are so many slaves, and there are countries essentially, and let's name one of them, China, where they have large numbers of factories where people are treated as slaves effectively, and nobody ever says boo to a goose when it comes to the Chinese. Yet we're all running, while we are running around destroying our statues, the Chinese are plotting, no doubt, something quite horrific. You know, other countries treat women in a way which is akin to slavery, and in a lot of Muslim countries, women's status.
I've got a question. Thank you for that. I want to throw this over to Harold. Harold, can I ask you a difficult question? Will you try it? May I?
Yes.
Harold, you're a black man. Your great-great-grandfather, both sides, were slaves. How do you feel today about that?
I don't want to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's black because it's impossible.
You're a white guy. Okay, you had they were serfs in Russia. How do you feel about it today?
I think the issue that we have to address is the fact that slavery and the slave mode of production in the United States resulted in a lingering culture of racist oppression, and that it was Obama, the great President Obama, who served 2 terms, who tried to unite Americans, who tried to unite society against the racist racial divide. And unfortunately, we've taken a turn back because with the arrival of Donald Trump in power, America, the discourse has turned into thuggery, demagoguery, and the most divisive presidency in the history of the United States. And these are the questions.
I don't know if I accept fully that. I mean, he has egregious points to his character, but I would state that I think it's important to just face the fact that the protesters who are burning and rioting are not from the right; they're from the left at the moment. So that's something we have to admit that's true.
Picking up on your thread about...
But Harold, thank you for the comment, and you were right. I wasn't trying to put you in the shoes, but I was saying what I wanted you maybe to say was, I don't know how I'd feel, but I might be angry. Okay. About
be angry.
That history.
You might well be angry.
Yeah.
As you know, Rick, Will, I'm completely against political correctness. But in this case, I will defer to the PC police of not trying to explain what a black person would be feeling like, because having watched so many people speak on CNN and other news programs in the last week, it's extraordinary how bitter many black Americans are today. And this is something that often doesn't get reported or widely circulated because it's an undercurrent in the black consciousness about how oppressed they feel when they're spot checked by police, when they are asked for ID, whereas white people are not asked for ID, or even when a black reporter was arrested by police 2 weeks ago when his white CNN colleague was allowed to go free. I mean, these are all anecdotal examples, but they point to the more general reality that black people do feel terribly oppressed. And it was extraordinary for me as a white privileged person to watch and learn their reactions.
Yeah, white privilege is another thing. I'm going to get involved in that, but just yet. We could talk about the existence or non-existence of white privilege a bit later if we have time.
Let's get to that, but coming back to this
Guy wanted to make a point.
Well, go back a little bit further. Let's go back 2,000 years. Romans invaded Britain and enslaved the entire British population. Not the same, you know, we suffer from heuristic biases where we focus on the immediate history, what's immediately around us right now, the noise of what's on our mobile phones and social media. But context, step back, look at the history. So Britons were enslaved, and the Romans were horrible people. They glorified killing people, animal cruelty, and all of this. But they also did a few good things as well, and there's statues of them everywhere. Do I see a Roman statue and want to pull it down? No. Why? Because I think we have to keep our history.
Of course.
And we can't change the history. And pulling down statues is not going to change that history, right? And so what we've been seeing in the last week in Britain has been disgraceful. This is like ripping pages out of a history book.
It's very Orwellian, isn't it? I think a point you made. You made on social media, one of your posts on social media, that thing from 1984.
Yeah.
There was no history, they destroyed everything, and the only was a continuous present, continually redefined by the party. That's what we live in.
The party is always right.
If you destroy memory, which is destroying history in a society.
This is ironic, isn't it? Because, of course, we're told all the time there are certain things we mustn't forget and we have to have. No. So, for example, it's a slight diversion.
This is the point.
But no, we're told we have to remember the Holocaust as if that is the only thing which happened in history. We're constantly we're told we have to remember, we can never forget. And yet other episodes of our nation's history, we're told somehow, oh, well, because somebody's father occasionally may have had something to do with slavery, therefore their son's name, in this case Gladstone, an eminent Prime Minister who did a lot of social good as Prime Minister, the Hall of Residence at Liverpool University has to be renamed because the students are feeling a bit uncomfortable. I mean, part of the problem is, of course, that the university authorities, particularly in the United States, particularly now in the United Kingdom, alas, are becoming so craven. They're just allowing themselves to capitulate in the face of whatever agitation the current crop of students wants to start. I mean, it is just craziness.
There's so many ironies.
It's like children.
Ironies. It's constantly banging on about diversity, but there's no diversity of opinion.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yes.
And that is the problem.
Which there should be.
And this is the sort of absolutely antithesis of the Enlightenment.
No, exactly. We should start. I want to come back and say it again. We should start from the point we are all prejudiced. So,
by definition, by being human.
By definition, and we have to admit that is obvious. So the point then beyond that is, how do we communicate? How do we make society fairer for everyone?
Well, I think we have been making society.
I take Harold's point as well. Imagine that you're being stopped all the time, and this.
Of course.
How would you feel?
In spite of all the fanfare, things are pretty fair. And the best book to read about this, which was published only about a year and a half ago, is Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now.
Steven
Pinker.
Pinker. Yeah.
Very famous Harvard professor of psychology, written several books. And he really gets into this Enlightenment Now.
No, Steven Pinker's amazing.
The case for reason, humanism, and progress today. Yeah. And he looks at the facts. Enlightenment. A factual-based approach to reason and argument.
Yeah.
And guess what? You look at any indicator of human
Right.
welfare,
Right.
every single one, almost every single one, and you track it as long as you can. Today, there's never been a better time to be born in this world,
Absolutely.
anywhere,
And we
of
should be
any
talking
race,
about that.
of any nationality, of any creed or culture. Right now, today, is the best time to be born.
I know, it reminds me of the joke
And
about
we need to be
flying.
reminded of that, and because
Yeah.
of course we constantly have the noise of the media on our mobile phones and TVs and so on, is constantly talking about bad news. Because guess what? It doesn't sell news to stand up in a quiet spot in Africa and say there has been no war here for 30 years.
There has been an election,
That
and the
doesn't-
losing
that's
party
not a
gave
very
up power
interesting
and
news story.
didn't machine gun their way into staying in power. I mean,
You
there's
know,
very
big-
positive stories around.
Well, yes, and this is a certain echo chamber that we live in, and just anecdotally and slightly off topic, but I think alluding to what you just said, a friend of mine who's a TV anchor was telling me that now they have the ratings, the viewership figures in real time as they anchor a TV show, and he said that as soon as he stopped talking about the coronavirus in early March, the ratings were falling. Right. So in a sense, in some way, we blame the media for stoking all kinds of unpleasant subjects, but perhaps we are to blame as well, because we actually push them to do that and emphasize the negative things.
Right.
So that's one comment.
When was the last time you heard a news story about the precipitous fall in female mortality rates during childbirth in Ethiopia? You can't say, but that's in the book. Go and look it up.
Yeah, I mean,
these are all great stories.
Jordan Peterson, I don't know why people don't like that guy. He seems the most amiable sort of fellow, really. But he also made a list. He says, look at all the great things that are happening, as Guy is now emphasizing. I want to ask Eva something.
And for all the Black Lives Matter movement, if you are African, you probably still today have the best chances of a better life by moving to America or Britain. And again, that's borne out by the facts.
Yeah, I mean, when I was...
if it's so terrible in
These are
Britain.
such terrible countries. They're such awful places to live. The
That's why
United
everybody
States and the
wants to
United...
go there.
Everybody wants to go there. People, refugees will travel halfway across Europe through all these wonderfully safe and secure countries to get to the United Kingdom, this terrible place. This terrible place for immigrants and foreigners, allegedly. And yet, who come and they fight and they struggle to get there. They could live their life in the Elysian fields of France or Germany or all the other countries they get through, but no, they want to come to this cold, wet, miserable island where the police are terrible, where everything's terrible, all these statues are oppressing them. I mean, I don't believe it, and nobody believes it. Now, this is the point, in actual fact.
There's two problems, yes, but there's two problems that are going on, I think, today, and maybe perhaps you'd like to join in on these. One we're talking about is prejudice. Call it what you want, prejudice. We all have it.
Of course.
It starts within us, and we all have different ones, and then it's written in the world at large around us. Okay, and we see those examples constantly. When you're picking teams for basketball, the best players get picked.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not that, quick. And then you're standing around. If you get picked, you're like, hey, what am I, chopped liver?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but
Because of their prejudice
I'm
against
very
it.
angry only being 5'9" and not being able to be a basketball player.
Exactly.
It's just not fair.
That's not fair. The rules are stacked. That's prejudice. The rules are stacked against him. I mean, this is the sort of absurdity of a lot of
But
it, isn't it?
you do feel bad if you're not picked. That's my point, too. So prejudice is real. Okay, but the other thing is the financial implications of the wealth, corporations, wealth being concentrated in corporations, which do a lot of good as well. My father worked for one of the major corporations, and he did very well. But the point is, when you have too much monopolizing of the wealth in too few hands, you strangle society.
Indeed.
And this, I think, is really if I could, this is a roundabout way to get back to Seattle. I think that this is a lot of what is going on in Seattle,
And in Britain.
and in Britain, and where all these protests. I think a lot of it is about the position that young people seem to find themselves in, where yes, the world is offering more opportunities, better health, et cetera, more communication than ever before, but less, perhaps, opportunity for the ambitious.
This comes all the way back to what Jordan Peterson has articulated the best in today. You know, he has read the literature backwards and forwards of everything he can get his hands on about the travails of the 20th century and the Bolshevik Revolution, all the misery and pain that led to, how and why, you name it, he knows it inside out. And one of the issues, of course, is this pernicious distribution in nature, the Pareto distribution, which essentially...
Pareto distribution.
Which is a very, very harsh inverse law.
Tell us about it, would you?
Pareto distribution is very simply that if you take any field of human creativity or endeavor, writing music, you find that that half of the productivity goes to the square root of the number of people doing it. And it's repeated and repeated. And it's the same in business and making money. You know.
So a few people are carrying theirs. I remember Bernard Shaw saying 2% do all the work that keeps society going. That's Bernard Shaw.
And it's very vicious. It's like a law of nature. And it applies to economic well-being as well. So unless governments intervene and redistribute, and the arguments in politics are largely about the degree of redistribution, then you get it all sort of filters up to the top. And then everyone else has nothing. And that clearly is not a very nice situation to be in.
Well, no, it ends up with barricades in the street.
It ends up with Bolshevism, where your best option, as the masses, becomes to burn it all down and start again. That's better than... And right now, what you're seeing is actually a lot of that in this Black Lives Matter movement.
Harold, are we... What kind of... Let's go around. Everybody have your 2 minutes or so on this. What are we seeing? What kind of revolution are we seeing? What's it like? Is it the French? Is it like the French, the Russian? Is it like 1848, 1968? Harold.
I think we're seeing a short-term revolt in consciousness. It's hard to know how long the news cycle will keep this going and when the movement will actually burn out, because the past has shown that the movement tends to dissolve after a month or so. And I think that as we get on in the summer, more attention will be focused on the critical election to rid ourselves of the fear-mongering narcissist Donald Trump. But I should like to refer back to the arguments made by the other panelists regarding fear-resistant Pinker and Jordan Peterson, my fellow Canadian. While I do admire Jordan Peterson for his very astute critique and exposition of the bankruptcy of thought policing and political correctness, I do, however, criticize his attacks on so-called postmodernist intellectual academic mob, which supposedly has perverted the course of thought. Because I think this is his own political prejudices intervening. And when it comes to the distinguished Harvard thinker Steven Pinker, it seems to me that his main thesis could be applied to almost any period in history where things are much better than they were before. When they developed the running water and a sewer system in London.
Except, of course, in the Dark Ages, so-called just after the beginning of the Middle Ages, where things were pretty bad for 300 years. They went directly backwards after the Roman Empire collapsed. But anyway, yes, Harold, good point. You are right.
Harold, that's the point. Things started getting better from the Industrial Revolution materially. And then the Enlightenment and the ideas that went behind that emerging in the 18th century have caused an acceleration in human progress. And right now what we're seeing is, I think, a stalling, because people are just ignoring facts. It's sort of anti-Enlightenment right now amongst this media class and Black Lives Matter movement.
I feel sorry for these young people, actually. I feel sorry because if you go back and look at the 60s, I mean, those people were serious. I mean, those people organized. The black people, the Black Panthers were organized, baby. I mean, they said, if we got to be violent, you come into our neighborhood, we're going to defend our neighborhood. They got really organized and they were serious. They went on television programs and put forward their political philosophy, which was coherent as far as their point of view, dealing with a set of prejudices they felt they had to deal with. And they were serious, man, not like these people. If you go back and even look at the Weather Underground, this was the terrorist group that sent letter bombs to people before you ever had the fellow, the Unabomber. I mean, you know, he learned from them. He was an amateur compared to the Weather Underground. These were serious people. They were armed, and they faced their set of prejudices and said, this is how we're going to deal with them. And it wasn't just going and camping out and having food trucks. This is like what's happening in Seattle is like a hipster holiday. Come on, fellas. You know, and I wonder if any of these people really know how to use the weapons that they've got hold of. They're going to hurt themselves, I rather think, most of them. Because I don't think any properly trained soldiers, they realize what taking up arms means. It's called rebellion. And people who take up arms, especially former soldiers, go to prison or worse for doing such things. So I think, you know, I really think it's very misguided, like a lot of the millennial preoccupations are. It seems immature. But who's responsible for that? They didn't learn it on their own.
No. Well, I think
it came from their parents.
But I think what is different, what we face in Europe and America, and let's sort of call that European civilization as a whole, for want of a better term, is that for the first time, really, anybody can remember, a lot of young people have rather worse prospects in life than their parents.
That's
because,
the point.
and this is I think, if they could articulate it, that's what they actually should be saying. But unfortunately, they can't, because the education system has been so dumbed down that they actually can't really articulate what it is they're really frustrated. So we have the summer weather coming up, which is always good for revolutions in the summer. Good idea. We have the frustration.
All the wars
yes, we have the frustration of people having been locked up for a couple of months because of this damned COVID thing.
Right.
We have. Young people have had their education interrupted. Others are feeling that, actually, where's their parents? Their father could go out and get a job, support their mother, support their brothers and sisters, live in a nice house, get them through university, all on an average income. Now, two high incomes are not buying it for most people.
No. And you still have $100,000
yet we have COVID-19.
Yeah.
For the first time ever, governments are closing down the economy. And guess what? The very richest people have all of a sudden got a hell of a lot richer. The poor people are getting more running water. They're getting more food. As Guy said, you know, more women in Ethiopia are being able to give birth to children without dying. But the vast middle is being hollowed out. And this is the frustration. This is the frightening thing, actually.
Cogent point. Ivo, would you care to comment on this from the point of view of Polish society? May I make one comment before you do that, Ivo, maybe as an introduction? And that is that I remember a black fellow who was working, came around to do some electrical work in our house in Atlanta, and I had my wife at the time was visiting with me, and he found out that she was Polish, and he said, oh, you're one of the newly freed people. Yeah. Because I'll leave you with that. I thought that was a sweet thing for him to say.
That's actually a beautiful thing to say. Well, I've had the dubious pleasure of being born and raised in a communist system, and let me just very briefly try to take a couple steps back, because when we talk about the current identity politics, because that's what we're really talking about, we're really going back to the shall we say, the original state of humanity, which was tribalism. In fact, you know, very often, probably more often than not, an individual group, clan, tribe, thousands of years ago, referred to themselves as humans, and to everyone else as something else. And you have a trace of that, for instance, in most Slavonic languages. The word for Germans is Niemcy, Nemet, which means those who don't speak. right? Because the languages were not mutually intelligible, the Slavonic and the Germanic. So the Slavs thought, well, they are something of a curiosity or definitely lesser than we are, and vice versa. And so this tribalism was very, very difficult to get rid of, and really the watershed moment is when in the early first century we have certain writers who suddenly write that now there is no such thing as a Jew or a Greek or a slave or a master, right, or a freeman, and that all humans are just that, humans, right? And when we are now trying to solve the problem of differences on different levels by reasserting the importance and the supreme nature of having one unique experience within one group, which no one else can understand. Therefore, we are in a sense doomed to belong to our little tribe. I know that this is not the right solution, because it has been tried, and humanity, when it was not treating others as equal humans, was always descending into a never-ending cycle of violence. Because if I am more human than you, then you should be subject to my will, right? And who is to decide who is more human than the rest? Well, brute force. So this is an insane way of trying to live in some sort of an order, and it has been tried and it didn't work. And by the way, this obsession with raw power is something that is a holdover or a newly discovered Marxism. And again, this has been tried, and believe me, I know it does not work.
No, coercion does not work. It never has. If you look back at history, coercion always fails in the end, because there is, I believe, something intrinsic in humanity which leans strongly towards cooperation and the survival that cooperation entails. So, thus, dictators, autocrats, and their like eventually fall away, and society rejuvenates itself. And I hope that we're going to be that this is just, as Harold was saying, as we've all been saying, that this is a phase that we're going through. Nicholas was also saying that. But if I say to you, Raz of Chaz, does it mean anything?
Say again.
Raz of Chaz. Speaking of dictators.
He's the new leader of Chaz, Raz Simon. Yes.
What
yes.
Ivo, Harold, would you care to speak on that? Harold, do you know anything about Raz of Chaz?
No, I prefer that we move to more salient points of discussion.
Well, I think Raz of Chaz, if you don't know who he is extremely salient. Is he not, Ivo?
Well, from what I understand, he's a gentleman with a bullhorn and a gun, who is trying to be the leader of the leaderless, autonomous, anarchistic, idealistic commune.
Summer of love. What's wrong with you? It's the summer of love. That's what the mayor said. It's the summer of love. That's how you show love. You make what it's wonderful, isn't it? They've put a wall around. We're talking about Seattle and downtown Seattle, Capitol Hill, Seattle, where they've now put a wall around it, and they're asking for you have to ask permission to go in and out.
And it's a good wall, you know. It's a wall that does not divide but bridges, you know.
I know. But anyway, Raz of Chaz. I just thought It's
Yeah.
a good name for a band, isn't it? Yeah.
Probably a reprobate globalist, because many of the people who demonstrate in Seattle are leftovers from the old, late, unlamented globalist movement, which
Well, no,
expired
yeah,
in
it's like the New York movement. The what was it called?
Occupy Wall Street.
Yes, Occupy. It's the Occupy. Is that what you're saying, Harold?
Yes, it's the same. It's the same.
Good point. I wanted to make that point. Thank you. Would you illuminate us further, please? Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I don't take the Seattle protesters as seriously. I take them as an extension of the existing level of tension in the United States. I mean, the main point is that in the next few weeks, we're going to see Donald Trump embark on a fresh series of Nuremberg rallies where he once again to enthrall his immense base with his familiar fear-mongering and hate speech. And this will be the critical time, I think, in the United States. We have to see what will be the reaction to Trump as he refuses to address the inequality in American society. And in fact, I would contend that Donald Trump is the man who has stoked more hatred and incipient violence than any other American president. I mean, Rick, you're a better historian of American history than I am, but certainly Trump is the plague on democracy and on the American landscape.
I don't think we can say that he's the worst president ever. I mean, there's a few candidates there, including the inimitable. Sorry, Nick, if I may borrow that word to refer to someone else, but in a not positive sense, the inimitable Warren G. Harding of Ohio, who was a complete lout. The non-entity called Millard Fillmore. May I introduce you to Franklin Pierce, who was less than a non-entity, and may I also bring forward the famous name of Andrew Johnson, who almost got the Civil War started back again, taking over after Lincoln. So there's been some people worse than Donald Trump, and I might even say that if you go back and read some of the things that Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Adams said. I call him that because I call him Mr. because I didn't know him. And some people think I may have. All right, stop it. Their arguments were legendary. Yeah. They hated each other, and the things they said and did to undermine each other were legendary. And Andrew Jackson, they called his wife a whore. So, prominently, time and time again in the newspapers of the day, while he was president. So we've been through all these things before.
You make an interesting point.
But Donald Trump is annoying. Yes, he's annoying. He was annoying before he was president. No one who thinks that Donald Trump wasn't annoying.
Well, yeah, but I think the problem is that many people, for example, I politically probably differ greatly from President Obama. But the point was, Obama, I think, brought a certain dignity to the office, and his wife and family did. A dignity to him as a, if you want to call it, it's an Americanism, the first family, which is lacking in Mr. Trump. I can imagine, although I disagree with him politically, it will probably be okay, and this is the test, of course, one should always apply of anybody. Yeah. It will be okay to spend a night in the pub with Barack Obama. You'll probably have a few laughs, and it will probably be quite some interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about his early days as a socialist in Chicago.
But I cannot imagine, in all honesty, I cannot imagine spending any time in a social context with Donald Trump. I think it would be interesting to just spend a night in the pub with Richard Nixon, because he, I think, of recent American presidents, was extremely good on foreign policy and was clearly a bright chap and had some good ideas. Well, and I'm sure George Bush would have been a great chap to go to the pub with, although you'd have had to have a lemonade, obviously.
Obama's extremely intelligent.
Yeah, but I'm saying that Trump, there is something about Trump, and I think he probably has a very thin skin, clearly, and a complete lack of a sense of humour.
Have you ever met any people who work in commercial property?
Yeah, lots. Here.
He reminds me of them.
Well, of course,
the more successful they are, a lot of those people have hair-trigger tempers. They're irritable. They are always thinking about, you know, what's going to go wrong. They're always leveraged to the hilt. They're going to make a zillion or lose it all.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they're constantly drinking milk of magnesia by the bottleful.
Tell me about it.
You know, or just think about business people. You know, I can think about even my own father. You know, he could be fairly ribald. You know, and I remember him getting together with his other business associates, and you know, no ladies allowed sometimes, right? And that's just the way business.
Well, that's fine.
Business is. They're not pretending to be anything but
once you
businessmen.
become president, you should have a different set of values, a different behaviour pattern.
Well, that's what we hoped would happen with Donald Trump.
But it hasn't happened.
But on the other hand, isn't it? At least you know what you're dealing with. I mean,
Well,
he
I
is
do. We know,
himself.
but I think Harold would say we don't actually know really
Well,
what
let's
we're
ask Harold what he's
we
would
don't
say.
actually know what we're
He's
dealing
right
with.
here. I can see his smiling face. Harold, what would you say? Nicholas thinks you have something to say.
With regard to Donald Trump, or in what regard?
Yeah, well, with regard to his winning personality.
Well, what can we say about Donald Trump? Pathological narcissist. He exhibits
That's the best kind.
psychotic behavior. He's a global villain. He's a sexual predator, and of course, a supreme egotist. He has no empathy towards anyone, and he insists on doubling down on the worst lies and deceits that he has propagated over the years. And it's incredible that in the last week, 4 American generals, 2 of whom had served with Donald Trump in his administration, basically criticized him and in some cases condemned him for his behavior, especially this extraordinary photo op at the church near the White House, where he tear gassed basically peaceful demonstrators in order to clear the path for himself and his fellow stormtroopers.
You're calling Secret Service stormtroopers? I know some Secret Service guys.
I think it's
They're pretty nice guys, actually.
It's contextual, isn't it?
If I were president, I'd like to have some. No, Harold, hyperbole is welcome, Harold. It's good stuff. But
Let me see the question then. You know,
jump in.
What does it tell us about the current state of political thinking in the world if precisely non-presidential traits get you elected president? What does it tell you about the decision-making process of those who decide to cast a vote in this direction, right? Maybe, and I think that's let me try to answer the question that I posed. Maybe people were so sick and tired of politics as usual, of the complete alienation of the ruling classes from reality, that they decided to send the wrath of God into the White House, you know.
I think there's something. There's something to that, Ivo. Definitely.
If there wasn't a Donald Trump, there would be we would have had to have invented one. So
you're suggesting that he is the Imelda Marcos of America, effectively. Is that what you?
Well, with a collection of ties rather than shoes, I think.
What?
With a collection of ties rather than shoes. No, I'm not.
Yes,
I'm
right.
not saying,
yeah, and what great ties they are.
Well,
but I'm saying that the democratic theater of the 1990s were resulted in that sort of revolutionary gesture, because. Yeah, that's what revolutions are about. They're about shaking up the establishment, and the establishment has been shaken.
Yeah, my point was, if you want to put... Okay, Harold, come in. Sorry.
I wouldn't describe Trump's ascendancy as a revolution in the strict sense. I think Trump, as Ivo correctly pointed out, is the result of a backlash against the promises of the liberal, democratic Obama presidency. And as we know, in the United States, the country is basically divided 50-50 or 52-48 between Democrats and Republicans, historically on a family basis, etc. But what caused Trump to be elected in the specific context is the fact that people hated Hillary Clinton. White males hated Hillary Clinton. I hate Hillary Clinton, but I still would have held my nose and voted for her against the neo-fascist Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and unfortunately some of his worst rantings suggests that he may try to somehow declare any election which goes against him as being invalid, citing erroneous theories about fraudulent voting. And in fact, there was just a study done by a nonpartisan organization about voter fraud, and out of 2 million votes which were examined, 300 potentially fraudulent mail-in or other ballots. 300 out of 2 million. So, but this is the line that Trump may take, should he, and he probably will lose the election to Biden, as long as Biden survives the campaign and remains.
Is that actually Biden we're seeing on TV, or is that the Madame Tussauds replica? I often wonder. Guy, you wanted to jump in.
I think it's an exaggeration to suggest that Trump is a threat to democracy. I think the good news about the way the American Constitution is set up is there are so many checks and balances on the office of the presidency and on the election process that it's not feasible to suggest that Trump is a threat to democracy.
Yeah, I think this is a good point. I mean, Harold, hyperbole aside, it's a point. You made your point. You made it strongly. Guy has now said that the system takes care of itself. I would say this: I've been reading various things where people say, various articles where people are saying that the Republicans will just rubber stamp anything that Mr. Trump gets up to. I call him Donnie when we're together. But I would suggest that not leaving office, if he loses, would definitely lead to the biggest revolt and even his expulsion from the Republican Party.
I think also that this big question constantly comes up: how is it that America, the world's leading economy, quarter of the global economy...
Just a second, Harold, we'll come back to it.
It's just the question: how is it that America, world's leading economy, military forces, outpower anybody, no problem. How is it that someone like Donald Trump becomes president of that country?
Yeah.
Ironically, I think it's actually a mark of success in society that politicians since the fall of the Berlin Wall, politicians have become less serious because of peace and prosperity. Politics has descended into show business, almost.
Because it's not as important as it used to be.
Why
is that? The system's running itself?
No, I think it's a mark of success and prosperity. There's a sort of vacuum to be filled now. We haven't got World War II to worry about. We haven't got the sort of Cold War communism to worry about. There are, don't get me wrong, huge, huge problems. But the big things of sort of national survival have been sort of, for now at least, maybe it's going to arise again with the rise of China and tensions and so on. But right now, and in the last 20, 30 years, there's been peace and prosperity, and all the big things of national survival have been put to bed. And so you get the rise of just enormous amounts of frivolous rubbish, you know, the Kardashians, silly magazines, and Donald Trump becoming
president. Why would anybody want to watch? I think that if you watch, you immediately become
But the danger point now, particularly as a result of COVID, is that the prosperity is under threat.
Prosperity is under threat.
Yes.
Yeah. You were making that point before.
Yeah, but I think it's very important. I mean, the other point I have as a non-American is to ask myself why in the last election the Republican Party and the Democratic Party put up candidates who nobody wanted to elect or vote for. And we're having a rerun this time in that you could choose with Trump or Joe Biden. With all due respect, probably, you know, traditional Republicans and traditional Democrats would rather be able to vote for somebody else, because I think neither candidate is particularly attractive.
It's a Hobson's choice yet again.
Yeah, again. And it's amazing that a country with as many people as America continually ends up with two elections nobody wants to vote for.
Harold.
Yes, I think there is it's not a Hobson's choice. I think there is a hell of a lot to recommend the candidacy of Joe Biden over Trump, who in some ways resembles a Roman emperor in a not particularly good era, such as Nero, who presided over a declining...
Why not Caligula? If we're going to go, let's go Caligula. My personal favorite.
Yeah, but I think in the Trump case, even the horse is refusing to serve.
Yes. Sorry, Harold, we're laughing over you. Come back.
All right.
You are not the Juan Williams of this discussion.
Trump does resemble a Caligula in the sense that he has a bully's predilection for torturing, tormenting, and otherwise maiming his enemies, real or imagined, and that he will double down on any straw man argument in order to make a point to his demented, deplorable base. Of course, I wouldn't say that if I was a candidate, but it is true. I mean, who in his right mind could cast a ballot for Donald Trump on any point? Donald Trump claims that he created this great economic boom. I'm sorry, you just have to look at the statistics and to see that the economic recovery began under Barack Obama, and it follows a trend line where the rate of increase is the same. Trump also claims to have increased miraculously black unemployment, when in fact, if you look at the level of employment of blacks in the United States from 2014 to 2019, the percentage is exactly the same, varying between 73 and 75% black employment. So Trump's argument is fallacious like the rest of them. It's too bad that it didn't become a religious guru after he quit the reality show that he was running. And he could have then sucked his parishioners dry by selling them some...
He could have done what? Sucked who dry? No, I would say this. I would say, that's enough about sucking. But I would say this, that I'll tell you one thing. He sure knows how to get one hot lady to like him. And I can't see any hot ladies. All Joe Biden's going around kissing everybody's hair, and none of them give him the time of day.
Yes, yes.
I mean, Donald Trump even gets the hot strippers. So, you know, he's got something good going for him.
Yeah, of course.
I liked him on that show. What was that show he did called Big Kahuna or something? What was that?
The Apprentice.
No, that's Harold's nickname. What?
The Apprentice.
The Apprentice. Yeah, I thought it was called Big Kahuna.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hated that show.
I didn't watch it.
But Arnold Schwarzenegger, thought it was very good, and so good that he wanted to. He took it over, didn't he?
Yeah.
For a while. The governor.
But I think Harold's slightly exaggerating about Trump. I mean, he's very
Harold,
hot-headed.
you're hyperbole. I mean, you're out Juan Williamsing Juan Williams.
He's certainly, you know, Trump's words are a little hot, let's say.
Yeah.
But then if you look at the underlying actions, you know, okay, he's gone a bit crazy and just ripping up lots of international organizations or pulling America out. But one of his first major tests
Well,
of
you're a
foreign
Brexiter,
policy,
so you shouldn't be against that.
one of his first major tests of foreign policy was with Assad in Syria, gassing his people. Obama had said, that's a red line, I won't accept it. Assad tested it, and Obama did nothing.
But Trump did something.
Trump did something, and he had the whole range of options, you know, the whole military might of the United States forces could have wiped out Syria for that. But actually his response, given all the panoply of options he had, was very restrained and surgical, sending in some Tomahawks to destroy the airfields from which the chemical weapons were launched, so that he wouldn't be able to do that again. So he has a style of sort of talking a big game, but the actions
are quite different.
Sometimes quite different, and one of the things I think, you know, and you can say this is just tax cuts for the rich, but he has brought some taxes down in the United States, which is actually a good thing for the economy, and good if you understand what the Laffer curve is, which everyone should.
It always makes me laugh.
You need to. Well, you know, the whole Western world has been overtaxed and remains so for a considerable amount of time, and this is actually impoverishing everybody.
Well, what
having the government,
exactly.
You know, it's the old words of Churchill. Yeah. Governments don't create any money. All they can do is take it from you and redistribute it.
Yeah, that's the point. It's our money, and everybody's like, oh, let me give it up.
Yeah.
I'm not giving enough. I feel guilty.
May I correct you? As a hardcore Keynesian, may I suggest that the Laffer curve has been an object of derision, note the use of that word, by economists for many, many years, and has been thoroughly debunked in all the scholarly literature. And it is only used by the worst elements of the Republican Party. And if you examine Trump's as a way of governing, he has expanded deficits by extraordinary levels, which the Republican Party supposedly maintained as a mark of its orthodoxy, that deficits were never to be allowed. Whereas Trump has been the greatest Keynesian spender in presidential history, far beyond Obama.
Let's just go back to the Laffer curve.
Harold, you're not following the Austrian school, I take it.
I am not.
Let's come back to the Laffer curve.
All right.
First of all, just to say what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Because by definition, it has to be functional. So the idea is that on the x-axis, you have the average tax rate, and on the y-axis, you have the total tax revenue a government makes. Okay. And so if you have zero taxes, there's zero revenue. Okay. And if you have 100% taxes, there's also zero revenue. Why? Because no one does any work, right? Why would you do anything to give it all to the government? You'd emigrate. You wouldn't do any work.
I already got one, Mama.
Okay. So as you start increasing taxes, you start making more revenue, but then it hits a peak and then it levels off and falls off again. Okay. And so the idea is that, you know, in all this sort of socialist overtaxing, we are over the curve, and actually, paradoxically, governments could cut taxes and increase revenue. So it's a win-win. And Harold says it's been debunked. Well, I'll give you an absolute concrete example. As recently as 6 months ago, microcosm of the Laffer curve, doctors in Britain were asked to do overtime, but because of the structure of their pensions and so on, they ended up with a marginal tax on their overtime pay of 90% plus. And guess what? We don't care what the overtime rates are. We're not doing it. We work a lot of hours anyway. We got enough money. If all I do is just, you know, if I get £40 an hour and I only make a couple of pounds out of that, guess what? I'm not doing it. So sorry, Harold. It's just wrong to say the Laffer curve doesn't exist and has been debunked.
It's been debunked. Two words. Circle. And if you wish to have further enlightened commentary on this issue, please read the articles of Paul Krugman, the distinguished Princeton Nobel laureate economist.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Or instead, you can look at actual facts rather than Paul Krugman's, shall we say, soliloquies. Actual facts, for instance, Poland, early 2000s, the excise tax on vodka goes down, and what happens to the governmental revenues from the vodka tax? They go up.
There we go.
Very, very, very quickly.
Harold.
That is not a cogent defense of the Laffer curve, but I take your point.
May I interject? I'm trying to help you, Harold. In the future, would you cite John Kenneth Galbraith if you want to make a good point, and not this Krugman guy who's, you know, come on. Galbraith is the guy who wrote the book on what you're talking about.
But everyone should know what the Laffer curve is. Art Laffer, the great man himself, there's a 5-minute YouTube video of him presenting exactly what it is and how it works. Very simple, and it works, it's real. And we are overtaxed.
Okay, we're stuck with a mixed economy any way you want to look at it. Go ahead. We're stuck with a mixed economy. Everybody agrees on that. It's just how mixed it's going to be. That's the argument. Okay?
Well, I think taxation is an interesting one. I think many people, and I'm not an expert on the United States federal tax system, but many people would say the overtax argument is very odd in the sense of if I'm a billionaire taking my income in dividends, I pay 12%. But if I'm a hard-working average American, you know, turning up for employment, I pay 30% on my income. And by the way, if my well-paid boss decides that he needs an extra couple of million in his paycheck, he'll close down my factory where I worked for 30 years and move it to China. And you know, so I think I'm all for fair taxation, but I mean, let's not pretend that somehow the American billionaires are suffering because of this unfair tax system. I mean,
nobody feels sorry for billionaires. But remember
they create
that
jobs.
Billionaires, yes, took the words right out of my mouth. As Meatloaf famously said, they create businesses, as we said, the Pareto
for
You know,
Of course they
you know,
create businesses, yes.
the problem is monopolies are not good, as we said from the beginning.
What we're seeing increasingly...
But business is great.
We're now seeing increasingly, as we become more and more dependent as human beings, as workers, for leisure, for all sorts of areas, we're becoming more and more dependent on technology. And that technology is essentially now concentrated in the hands of a handful, in fact, of American multi-billionaires, and who are now increasingly, and Facebook is a good example, increasingly using their own views of the world to actually influence what we... And this is bad.
Have to be broken.
Exactly.
That's
And this is the problem.
Market failure.
We all agree on that.
Exactly. Good.
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah.
Just
Everybody, I think, all the leading thinkers on both sides of the spectrum, or across the spectrum, parties and economic spectrum, agree that the monopolies need to be tackled, and it's one of the major problems. And as Harold was saying before, I believe it was Harold, that the Occupy Wall Street, now the Occupy Seattle, we could call it, be a better name for it, movement, a lot of that stems from the unfairness that's perceived, and not only perceived in principle, but is operating in the lives of these students who are absolutely broke, who went to university, got a huge debt, and now they come out and with their mortarboard, take off their mortarboard, toss it in the air, and never see it again, because it's to the Starbucks barista queue for you, buddy.
And this is the problem, in actual fact.
Right.
And this is...
And that's wrong.
That is wrong. Something has gone very wrong.
The universities can't teach you to be socialist,
but
and then hit you with a huge capitalist debt.
No, but something has really gone wrong.
It's not right.
Something has gone wrong with the balance of the economies. When so many people it doesn't matter, are feeling that something is not quite right. We were all told when we were younger, you go to school, you work hard, you go to university, you work hard, you will then have a profession or a job, and you will be able to provide for your family in a sensible fashion. Right. And that's what most people were brought up to believe, and that's actually probably what most people want. And now, in the last couple of decades, this is all changing. And then there are wealthy people saying, you should do better. You've got to accept in your life. You're going to have to fight. You're going to have 5 different jobs and careers. Don't worry about it. But for the vast majority of people, that is actually not realistic. And you can work hard, and then somebody gets McKinsey or somebody in, and they say, why don't you move your factory to China? And then, of course, you have, when we were talking earlier about revolutions, you have the Marine Le Pen argument. Why should we allow the slaves of the third world to sell goods to the unemployed of our countries? And and nobody has yet answered that argument. And that is a very... And she was obviously raising it for difficult political issues. But, I mean, the point is, it's still a valid argument. If I wanted to build a factory in Poland to, provide everything which you find in the Arcadia shopping centre, and I'm going to employ girls from Suwałki...
Arcadia is a shopping centre in Warsaw.
I'm going to pay them, $10 a month, and they'll have 1 day off a month, and they'll work 12 hours a day. People would say, rightly, you're nutty. In Poland, we do not allow workers to be treated like that. So instead, the Arcadia shopping centre is full of goods produced under those conditions, except the factory is not giving the girls of Suwałki employment. It's giving the girls of Wuhan or wherever it is employment. And this is, I'm all for free trade.
Suwałki is a city in Poland.
I'm all for a region. I'm all for free trade, obviously. But globalisation something has gone wrong with globalisation and its effect, which is leading in Europe, in America, to this feeling of insecurity, and people are protesting. And we saw it in all sorts of. We saw the rise of Trump. Some people say we saw it in the Brexit vote. People are protesting against something. They don't quite understand what's going on, except they feel instinctively something is not right. So they're protesting.
Well, we're running to time, gentlemen. We're not. We got about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to cap. Prejudice exists everywhere.
Yes,
we've determined that. Monopolies need to be attacked. We've determined that because they're causing a lot of trouble with too much concentration at the top and not enough money in the body of the economy for people, okay? Stock market doing well, but ordinary small business being absolutely killed off. Okay, we've agreed on those things. We haven't agreed on Mr. Trump, but I don't think we're going to. It's one of the most And he must love being a narcissist, the controversy that he causes, that everyone's talking about him all the time. So we're playing right into his... He's just a Kardashian, isn't he?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, he's like a Kardashian. But I wanted to ask you, as we're running out of time, just a little lighter question. If you could tear down... I remember when they were tearing down the statues in Central Europe that had been put here by the invading hordes of the East, otherwise known as Russians and their cohorts. They were tearing those statues down because Polish people thought, hey, wait a second. That's not us. Those are not our people. Those are the people that you selected to venerate on our soil. If you could tear down statue, Ivo, any statue you would tear down, or would you leave them the way they are, or what's your comment? Does it matter? And then Harold, you're next.
Very briefly, of course, as you said, the statues of Lenin and other brutal, murderous communists were put up in Poland and across Eastern and Central Europe as symbolic violence. They were basically marking territory. See, we put statues of people who hated you and you can do nothing about it. So we are in charge. Basically, that was the message. So obviously, tearing them down was an absolutely righteous and right thing to do. In terms of going back into history and applying our principles of today or prevailing moods of today to truly historical figures, that is a very slippery slope, because what next would be toppling statues of pharaohs in Egypt because they were probably rather unsavory characters, right? So there's a big difference.
Very good, thank you. What say you, Harold?
I wouldn't tear any statues down, because I think each statue is a symbol of the historical past, and it can be regarded as something to protest against or something to support. Although I would have made an exception, I presume, for statues of Lenin, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and other mass murderers. But mass murderers aside, somebody like Winston Churchill, who may have entertained racist thoughts or applied barbaric policies objectively in various theaters of the world, I think you have to make an exception to that, because it's a slippery slope. We can go back infinitely in history and destroy every statue because these people never abided by the politically correct tenets of the woke millennial snowflake generation of today. I mean, for example, the latest example of PC policing and hysteria is the fact that the BBC has decided to ban the Germans episode of Fawlty Towers. And they have banned the episode not because John Cleese is shown goose-stepping in a Monty Python-esque silly walk manner a la Adolf Hitler. No, apparently the episode has been banned because somebody makes an obscure reference to a West Indian cricket player. So, I mean, the level of absurdity to which the political correct mob has descended, it's extraordinary.
Thank you, Harold. And God bless Viv Richards. Nick, can I throw it over to you?
Yeah, I would not remove any statues. I mean, the difference between a statue which is put up by an occupying, the statues of Lenin in this part of the world, for example, and what's going on in the UK, these are figures from our history. We weren't, thank God, never occupied by anybody. The Romans, but they brought us useful things as well.
What did the Romans ever do for us?
Well, they straight roads, central heating, sewage,
baths.
Yes, but I wouldn't be removing any statues actually at all.
You wouldn't remove any? Yes. Let history lie.
Let history lie. Yeah.
I wouldn't remove any, underline all the previous points, and we need these statues. We need bad history as well as a good history so we can learn.
Exactly.
So we know where we are. It's the old navigational metaphor. We can't know where we are unless we know where we've come from. And God help us trying to go forwards if we don't know where we are.
Well,
in other words, you've got to have all of these pieces of history lined up to understand where you are and how to move forwards. And again, just to underline the slippery slope point, you know, if we tear down statues we don't like, then it's works of art we don't like, it's books we don't like, it's rewriting the media we don't like, it's pulling down buildings we don't like.
Final point. We were condemning the Taliban a few years ago for blowing up statues in Iraq for their destruction of Palmyra, all these sort of places. Yet we're standing idly by. In the UK, in Bristol, the police stood idly by while a statue of Colston was shown. You know, and we're now seeing this stupid debate about Cecil Rhodes, a great man in Oxford.
Yeah, my favorite statue is the one of Blackbeard.
Yes.
In South Carolina. I hope it stays, you know, because I like a good pirate. And I can find one.
But by extension, the Flavian Amphitheatre, better known as the Colosseum, built by 40,000 Jewish slaves.
Yeah.
Let's pull it down.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a terrible stain on history because it was built by 40,000 Jewish slaves.
We have to deal with history, and we have to learn from the mistakes and the pain that was caused. And we have to deal with it. But what we need above all, I think we can agree, is we need to find a better sense of fairness, because we all are indeed in this together. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my guest, Ivo Binder in Warsaw, Harold van Kurs in Estonia, in Tallinn, the beautiful town of Tallinn, Estonia. Thank you, Harold. And I'd like to thank Guy Pinsent, the inimitable, sartorial, resplendent Nicky Richardson, no relation, unfortunately. If only it were true that we could be related. I will have the genealogists continue to search for a viable connection. Thank you for watching There's a Will. It's been a lot of fun, and look forward to the next one. Harold, goodbye. Ivo, goodbye.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.